Tessa's call came at 6:42 in the evening. She wasn't crying. She was screaming like someone watching her life get padlocked shut in front of her guests, over the muffled soundcheck bass. She shrieked, "I need you to call them right now." I looked at my lawyer's email notification and finally smiled. Dad had told me it was just family money and to forget it. Tonight, they will all learn why I didn't. My name is Isla Miller. I am 34 years old, and on the most important night of my sister's life, I am sitting in the dark in my St. Louis apartment. I am wearing faded sweatpants and an oversized college t-shirt, completely untouched by the frantic energy radiating from the other side of the city. Outside my window, the Missouri streetlights bleed through the wooden blinds, casting long, sharp, horizontal shadows across my hardwood floor. It is quiet here. It is the kind of deliberate, heavy, suffocating quiet you only experience when you have completely isolated yourself from a disaster you meticulously engineered. On the polished granite of my kitchen island, my phone vibrates. It vibrates with such violent urgency that it slowly inches toward the edge of the counter. Threatening to drop, the screen flares up, illuminating the dark kitchen with a harsh blue glow. Tessa Miller. That is missed call number 11. I do not reach for it. I do not flinch. I just stand there, a glass of tap water in my hand, watching the device buzz, shimmy, and finally go dark. I count the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4. The screen flares back to life with violent suddenness. Missed call number 12. She is relentless. But then again, desperation breeds a very specific kind of persistence. I step forward, pick up the phone, and press the green accept button. I immediately hit the speaker icon and set the phone back down on the cold stone. The audio hits me like a physical blow. It is pure, unadulterated chaos pouring out of the tiny speaker. A heavy, distorted bass line thumps rhythmically in the background. The unmistakable sound of an event soundcheck going completely off the rails. I can hear the sharp, piercing screech of microphone feedback echoing off high, vaulted ceilings. I hear the frantic, rapid-fire clicking of someone sprinting in expensive stilettos across polished concrete floors. Then, I hear Tessa. She is not using her usual voice. My older sister has spent her entire life perfecting a tone of casual, effortless superiority. It is a voice designed to remind you that she belongs at the head of every table, that she is the golden child, the successful entrepreneur, the one who always lands on her feet. Tonight, that voice is completely gone. "Isla!" she shrieks. Her breath is ragged, pulling air in harsh gasps. "Isla, pick up the damn phone." I say nothing. I let the silence on my end hang heavy over the chaotic noise on hers. "I know you are there," Tessa screams into the receiver. A man shouts something indistinct and panicked in the background. Tessa covers the microphone, her voice becoming a muffled, furious bark as she yells at him to just wait and hold the line. She comes back to me, the pitch of her voice breaking entirely. "Isla, you need to call them right now. I do not care what you're doing. You need to call them right now and fix this." "Fix what, Tessa?" My voice is flat, unbothered. The contrast between my tone and hers is absolute. "The accounts," she gurgles, sounding like she is literally choking on her own rising panic. "The operating account is completely frozen. I cannot authorize a single wire transfer. The luxury catering company is standing out in the loading dock, and their manager is refusing to drop the pallets of food. The florist is threatening to pack up all the floral arches and leave. There is a man in a cheap gray suit standing right in the middle of my front lobby with a massive stack of legal papers, and he is telling my head event coordinator that my business accounts do not legally exist anymore. They are shutting us down. I do not look at the phone. My eyes shift slowly to my laptop screen, which is glowing faintly in the dim kitchen. An email sits at the very top of my inbox. It arrived exactly 4 minutes ago. It is from Naomi Cade, my litigation attorney. The subject line is written in stark, unambiguous text, Temporary restraining order executed. The body of the email is just one single, beautifully simple sentence confirming that the judicial holds have been successfully placed on every single financial account associated with her business. The trap has sprung perfectly. Tessa's breathing is harsh and wet over the speaker. She drops the sheer panic for a fraction of a second, desperately trying to find her old authority. It sounds incredibly pathetic. You need to call your lawyer. Call her right now and tell her to stop this ridiculous game. We are opening the doors in less than 2 hours. I have 200 high-profile guests arriving. The mayor of the city is coming. Isla, you are going to ruin me. Stop this right now. This is it. This is the invisible, silent legal war we have been fighting for weeks, finally dragging itself out of the shadows and exploding right in the middle of her perfect night. I take a slow, deep breath. The air in my apartment is cool and still. My heart rate is incredibly steady. I have waited a long time for this exact exchange. You are standing in the copper vine house. Aren't you? I ask, my voice barely above a whisper, carrying zero warmth. The line goes dead silent. The background noise of the lavish venue is still there. The thumping bass, the distant shouting, the frantic clinking of glassware. But Tessa completely stops breathing. She never told me the name of the venue. She kept it a secret. She never told me where she was located. I am not supposed to know a single thing about the corporate structure she secretly built to hide the money. I am just supposed to be the quiet, boring younger sister who works in a cubicle and lets the family walk all over her. The silence stretches for a full half-second. It is a profound, terrifying silence. It is the distinct sound of my older sister realizing she is no longer the smartest person in the room. It is the sound of her realizing that every single move she made in the dark has been tracked, categorized, forensically analyzed, and weaponized against her. What the hell are you doing? Isla? Her voice is a low, guttural growl now. The frantic panic is replaced by a raw, primal fear. I reach out with one finger and tap the glowing red button on the screen. The call disconnects instantly. The sudden silence returning to my kitchen is deafening and absolute. I pick up my phone and turn it face down on the granite island, dismissing the sudden influx of text messages that immediately start pouring in. I slide my laptop closed, shutting off the faint glow of the legal confirmation. I turn around slowly and lean against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms as I look out toward the dining table. There is no food on the table. There are no decorative centerpieces. There is only a single, massive, 3-inch thick binder sitting dead center under the beam of the overhead pendant light. The label on the spine is printed in crisp, black, block letters. Miller Family Trust Accounting. Inside that heavy binder is every single lie, every expertly forged signature, and every quiet, insidious theft that brought our family to this exact, destructive moment. Inside that binder is the undeniable, paper-trailed proof of an $80,000 betrayal. It is the proof of a theft that my own father looked me in the eye and told me to swallow and forget for the sake of keeping the family peace. I walk slowly over to the dining table and rest my hand flat on the cool leather cover of the binder. I trace the embossed letters with my thumb, feeling the weight of what I have done, and more importantly, feeling the absolute justification of it. To understand how a highly anticipated grand opening with 200 elite guests crumbles into total dust before the very first drink is even poured, you have to go back. You cannot start at the screaming phone call. You have to go back to the exact day the money vanished from my life. 3 months earlier. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and perfectly ordinary. I was sitting at my small dining table with a mug of black coffee, a legal pad, and my laptop open to the wiring instructions from my real estate agent. I was buying a house, a modest, historic brick townhouse in Maplewood with original hardwood floors and a tiny backyard. It was not a mansion, but it was mine. To secure it, I needed to wire the closing funds by noon. The money was waiting for me, $80,000. My grandmother had set up a designated trust fund for me before she passed away, explicitly locked until I turned 18, with the strict stipulation that the principal could only be drawn down for higher education or a first-time home purchase. I had paid my way through college with scholarships and night shifts specifically, so I could save her gift for this exact moment. I opened a new tab, navigated to the Prairie Gate Trust Administration portal, and typed in my credentials. I clicked the login button, took a sip of my coffee, and waited for the dashboard to load. The screen refreshed. I looked at the bold text at the top of the summary page. Available balance $42.16. I blinked. I set my coffee mug down. I hit the refresh button on the browser. The screen reloaded. $42.16. My first thought was incredibly mundane. A system glitch. A display error on the back-end server. Financial institutions update their software all the time. And sometimes the user interface breaks. I clicked on the Transaction History tab to see if there was a pending hold. The page populated, and the breath left my lungs. There was no glitch. The ledger was agonizingly clear. Over the past 6 weeks, there had been 3 massive, sequential outbound wire transfers. The first was for $25,000. 2 weeks later, another $30,000. Finally, just 10 days ago, a final withdrawal of $24,957.84, leaving the account virtually empty. Next to each line item, the description read, Beneficiary Reimbursement Distribution. My hands started to shake. I picked up my phone, dialed the toll-free number on the back of my old account card, and navigated the automated menu. After 10 minutes of agonizing, smooth jazz hold music, a customer service representative answered. I escalated the call immediately, demanding an account manager. A woman named Sarah took the line. Her voice was calm, practiced, and deeply unhelpful. She verified my identity using my social security number and my date of birth. I asked her where my $80,000 had gone. Ms. Miller, Sarah said smoothly, the sound of her typing echoing softly over the line. I am looking at the disbursement log now. Those 3 withdrawals were fully authorized and processed according to the trust guidelines. They were requested via hard copy distribution forms, categorized as beneficiary reimbursements for qualified expenses, and they included the required wet signatures. I did not sign anything, I said, my voice rising in panic. I have not touched this account in 5 years. I need a copy of those statements and the authorization forms immediately. I can certainly email you a secure link to the documents, she replied. I will send it to the primary email address on file. Give me just 1 moment. I opened my current email inbox and waited. Nothing arrived. I refreshed it again. Nothing. Sarah, what email address do you have on file for me? She read it out to me. It was an old family internet service provider email address, an account my parents had set up when I was in middle school. One I had not logged into for at least a decade. And the mailing address, I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. She read off the street address of my parents' house in the suburbs, the house I had moved out of 12 years ago. Someone changed my contact information, I said, the panic suddenly shifting into a sharp, freezing clarity. The contact update was submitted by mail 2 months ago, accompanied by a signed change of address form, Sarah explained, her tone shifting slightly, sensing the legal liability hovering in the air. The sheer terror was not just about the missing $80,000. It was about the terrifying precision of the theft. This was not a stolen password or a random internet hack. This was someone who knew exactly how conservative trust administration worked. They knew that old money institutions still relied heavily on paper forms, mailed confirmations, and physical signatures. They understood the system well enough to make a complete draining of my life savings look like standard. Boring administrative procedure. I hung up the phone. I did not cry. Crying was a useless reaction to a forensic problem. Within 20 minutes, I was in my car, driving straight to the regional records office of the trust administration firm downtown. It took me an hour to get past the receptionist and get seated in front of a mid-level compliance officer. I demanded to see the scanned copies of the withdrawal authorizations. Not a digital summary, but the actual scanned paper forms. He turned his monitor toward me. I leaned in, staring at the high-resolution scan of the first withdrawal request. The ink was blue. The handwriting filling out the account routing numbers was neat and deliberate. Then, I looked at the bottom of the page. The signature line. It looked like my name. If you glanced at it quickly, you would assume it was mine. But I work in asset integrity. I look at documents for a living. The pressure of the pen was too heavy. The connecting loop between the S and the L in Isla was hesitant, lacking the fluid muscle memory of my actual signature. But the most glaring error was the date written next to the name. The number 7 had a horizontal line struck through the middle of the stem. I have never, in my entire life, crossed my sevens. Then, my eyes drifted down to the notary section. The stamp was there, but right below it, in the section designated for identity verification, there was a small, handwritten notation scrawled in the margins by the processing agent. Relationship to trustee daughter, confirmed by father. The air in the small office seemed to vanish. I stared at those 6 words until they blurred. Confirmed by father, my dad. I sat back in the leather chair. I did not immediately accuse anyone out loud to the compliance officer. You never show your hand until you hold all the cards. But in the quiet, analytical part of my brain, a complete picture was forming. There was only one person in my world who was intimately aware of the exact stipulations of my grandmother's trust. Only one person who had the sheer, breathless audacity to view my designated inheritance as liquid family capital waiting to be utilized. And only one person who could convince my father to turn a blind eye and confirm a lie over the phone to a trust officer. Tessa. I walked out of the building and stood on the sidewalk in the midday sun. I pulled out my phone and called my real estate agent. I told her the closing funds were unavailable. I told her I had to pull out of the contract for the Maplewood townhouse. I listened to her disappointed sigh and accepted that I was forfeiting my $500 earnest money deposit. I hung up, got into my car, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I did not go back to my apartment. I did not go to work. I drove out of the city, merging onto the highway, heading straight toward the suburbs. I was going to my parents' house, and I was not leaving until I ripped the truth out of them. I parked my car in the driveway just after 7 in the evening. The porch light was on, casting a warm, welcoming glow over the manicured lawn. From the outside, it looked like the quintessential American suburban home, a sanctuary of safety and unconditional support. I killed the engine, sat in the dark for exactly 60 seconds to steady my breathing, and then walked up the concrete path. I did not knock. I still had my key. When I pushed the front door open, the heavy scent of roasted garlic and rosemary hit me. The house was humming with the comfortable, low-stakes energy of a typical family dinner. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick hallway runner, and stopped in the arched doorway of the dining room. They were all there. My mother, Linda, was pouring water. My father, Ron, was carving a roast at the head of the table, and sitting right across from him, radiating the kind of chaotic, self-important energy she always carried, was Tessa. She was holding a sleek silver tablet, aggressively swiping through a gallery of photos and shoving the screen toward our parents. She looked completely unbothered, her hair perfectly blown out, wearing a silk blouse that probably cost a significant fraction of my monthly rent. "Look at the exposed brick in the main hall," Tessa was saying, her voice loud and vibrating with excitement. "I am telling you, the Copper Vine house is going to book out 2 years in advance. The rustic luxury aesthetic is exactly what the high-end bridal market wants right now." "It looks beautiful, sweetie," my mother murmured, offering a soft, placating smile. "Honestly," Tessa continued, taking a sip of red wine, If I had not secured that bridge financing exactly when I did, the previous owners would have sold the property to a commercial developer. It was a miracle. The timing was absolutely flawless. I stood in the doorway. The air in my lungs turned to ice. A temporary bridge capital. The timing was flawless. The horrifying puzzle pieces snapped together with such violent force it made me dizzy. I stepped into the room. The conversation died instantly. 3 pairs of eyes snapped toward me. My mother's face lit up with mild surprise, while my father lowered the carving knife. Tessa just blinked, slightly annoyed that her presentation had been interrupted. "Isla," my mother said, her voice fluttering. "We did not know you were coming over. Have you eaten? Let me get another plate." I ignored her. I walked straight to the center of the oak table, reaching into my jacket pocket. I pulled out the folded, stamped document I had forced the compliance officer to print for me. I dropped it right in the middle of the table, letting it land hard next to the gravy boat. "Who took it?" I asked. My voice was completely flat. There was no yelling. There was no trembling. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that has weight to it. My mother looked at the paper, then immediately looked down at her lap, her shoulders shrinking inward. She knew. She might not have participated, but she absolutely knew. Tessa frowned, picking up the paper with her manicured fingers. She glanced at the bold black ink, and for a fraction of a second, the muscles in her jaw tightened. But my sister was a master of the pivot. She dropped the paper back onto the table and let out a dramatic, exasperated sigh. "Oh, please do not start with the dramatics, Isla," Tessa said, rolling her eyes. "It is just a temporary internal transfer. I needed liquid cash to close the venue contract before the weekend. I am going to put it back the second the grand opening revenue clears." She said it with such casual entitlement that I actually felt a wave of nausea. "You forged my signature," I stated, staring directly into her eyes. "You drained my entire trust fund." "It is family money," Tessa snapped back, her voice rising, shedding the sophisticated entrepreneur act. "Grandma left that money for the family. I am actually doing something with it. I am building an empire. Isla, you were just letting it sit there rotting in a conservative index fund while you rent a tiny apartment." "I was closing on a house today," I said quietly. "I lost the house." Tessa waved her hand dismissively in the air. "You can buy a house anytime. This venue was a once-in-a-lifetime acquisition. You just need to look at the bigger picture." I turned my gaze away from the thief and looked at the man sitting at the head of the table. My father had not said a single word. He was staring at the carved meat, his jaw set, his face completely unreadable. "They required a verbal verification," I said to him, my voice dropping an octave. "The Trust Administration Office called the guarantor contact on file. They called you. Who verified the transaction?" "Dad." My father finally looked up. His eyes were cold, devoid of the paternal warmth I had spent my entire life trying to earn. He did not look ashamed. He looked irritated. "I did not sign any financial documents," he said slowly, choosing his words with deliberate care. "The agent called and asked to confirm family relationships. I simply confirmed that you were my daughter. I am not responsible for the banking protocols of a third-party firm." The betrayal was a physical blow. Tessa stealing from me was greed. My father weaponizing a technicality to facilitate that theft was something entirely different. He was the barrier that was supposed to protect me, and he had willingly opened the gate. "You knew she was taking my money," I said, the reality solidifying in my chest. "Your sister is at a critical turning point in her career," my father countered, his voice adopting that heavy, suppressive tone he always used to crush any dissent in the house. "You have a pension. You have excellent health insurance. You have a stable corporate job that pays you every 2 weeks. Do not ruin your sister's future over $80,000. Just $80,000. He said it like I was demanding compensation for a scratched bumper. "You always do this?" Tessa chimed in, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. You always make everything a massive, clinical issue. You overreact like some tight-wound auditor who cannot see the forest for the trees. She threw the word auditor out like an insult. She had no idea what I actually did at the asset integrity firm. She thought I just pushed spreadsheets around. She had no idea that she had just committed felony wire fraud against a woman who spent 40 hours a week professionally dissecting financial crimes for ruthless corporate litigators. I looked at the three of them. My mother, paralyzed by cowardice. My father, rewriting morality to protect his favorite child. My sister, sitting there, bathed in the absolute certainty that she would get away with it. I am not letting this go, I said. My voice was steady, but the air around me felt electric. I am going to get every single penny back. I am reporting the fraud tomorrow morning. I will use the law to rip that venue apart if I have to. My father slammed his heavy fist onto the oak table. The silverware jumped. The wine glasses clattered against each other. My mother let out a small, frightened gasp. He pointed a thick, trembling finger right at my face. His face was flushed red with absolute authority. "You listen to me," he growled, his voice echoing off the dining room walls. "If you drag this outside this house, if you bring lawyers into this and humiliate your sister publicly, consider yourself tearing this family apart with your own two hands. We solve things internally. It is done. Forget it." He stared at me, waiting for me to shrink. He waited for the tears. He waited for the obedient, quiet younger daughter to bow her head, accept the injustice, and preserve the flawless image of the Miller family. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw a plate against the wall. I looked at my father's red face. I looked at Tessa's smug, relieved smirk. I looked at the stolen money sitting silently between them. "Okay," I whispered. I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I walked down the hall, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cool night air. I closed the door quietly behind me. They thought they had won. They thought my silence was surrender. But as I walked to my car, the hurt evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hyper-focused clarity. I was no longer the wounded daughter fighting for her parents' approval. I was an investigator, and they had just handed me the entire map of their crimes. I got into my car, pulled out a notepad from the glove compartment, and began to write. At 8 o'clock the following morning, I walked through the heavy glass doors of Stonebridge Asset Integrity Group. The firm occupied the entire 14th floor of a sleek downtown high-rise, and the environment was a sanctuary of cold, clinical precision. The air smelled of expensive espresso and sanitized air conditioning. As a senior specialist tracking civil asset fraud, my professional existence revolved around dissecting complex financial webs, identifying hidden offshore holding companies, and proving that people who smiled warmly in corporate boardrooms were quietly siphoning millions. I lived in the architecture of deception. I knew better than anyone the vast, unyielding canyon that exists between knowing in your gut who committed a crime and possessing the undeniable, court-admissible proof required to destroy them. I did not use my firm's proprietary tracking software or pull any corporate favors to investigate my own family. Crossing that ethical line would create a messy liability, and I needed my hands to be absolutely clean. Instead, I simply applied the exact forensic methodology I utilized for our Fortune 500 clients. I booked a small, windowless conference room during my lunch hour. I opened a fresh, heavily encrypted digital file on my personal laptop. I began to build a master timeline. I systematically compartmentalized the evidence into 4 distinct categories: motive, access, execution, and concealment. I turned off all notifications on my phone. I muted the family group chat containing my mother, my father, and Tessa. Emotion is the absolute enemy of a clean investigation. If you scream at a thief, if you argue with them over a dining room table, you only teach them where your blind spots are and how to hide their tracks better next time. Total. Suffocating radio silence was my very first weapon. My initial target was the catastrophic structural failure at Prairie Gate Trust Administration. Sitting in the quiet conference room, I drafted a formal, intensely aggressive letter of demand. I did not ask for apologies, and I did not ask for an explanation from their customer service department. I demanded the raw technical data. I legally requested the complete metadata files of all digital access logs, the raw Internet Protocol addresses associated with the recent account profile changes, the one-time password verification routing histories, and the complete chain of custody for every physical document submitted in the last 12 months. When the encrypted packet arrived from their legal compliance department 3 days later, the digital fingerprints were glaringly obvious. The institution's security system required a two-factor authentication code to officially change a mailing address on the trust account. The internal system logs showed that the automated text message containing that critical 6-digit code was not sent to my current cellular device. It had been cleanly routed to a secondary line on an old family data plan. It was a phone number I had surrendered over a decade ago when I moved out. A line that was still actively maintained, paid for, and controlled by one person. The registered owner of that specific cellular billing account was my father. He had not merely confirmed my identity over a brief phone call. He had provided the active digital infrastructure necessary to bypass the security protocols. Next, I turned my analytical focus to the physical paperwork. I pulled up the high-resolution digital scan of the first withdrawal request. I completely bypassed the forged signature on the bottom line. Amateur investigators obsess over signatures, but forgers practice signatures for hours. They rarely practice the boring, bureaucratic margins of a document. I magnified the notary public stamp imprinted near the bottom corner of the page. It was a standard Missouri state seal. I opened the public state database for commissioned notaries and cross-referenced the identification number on the blue stamp. The results loaded instantly, and a cold smile touched the corners of my mouth. The notary was a real person, but their legal commission had officially expired 28 days before the date handwritten on the withdrawal form. The notary had likely used an old stamp without renewing their state license. The document was legally dead on arrival, because the stamp was invalid. The identity verification was invalid, making the entire financial transaction fundamentally illegal. Armed with this structural flaw, I knew I needed a litigator, not a soft-spoken family mediator, but a wartime legal strategist. I hired Naomi Cade. Naomi was a senior trust litigation attorney who wore sharp, tailored suits and possessed a completely ruthless, unsentimental view of familial relationships. Sitting across the heavy mahogany desk in her pristine office, I laid out my master timeline and the printed evidence packet. She reviewed the documents in total silence for 20 minutes. When she finally looked up, her dark eyes were sharp and calculating. She immediately recognized that this was not merely a domestic squabble over a borrowed inheritance. This was a catastrophic failure of fiduciary duty by the trust administrators, compounded by coordinated, malicious self-dealing. "You do not speak to your sister," Naomi instructed, her voice flat, leaving absolutely no room for debate. "You do not text your mother. You do not answer phone calls from your father. If they realize you are building a forensic legal case, they will immediately begin restructuring the cash flow. They will dissolve the current corporate entities, shift the liabilities, and destroy any soft evidence they hold. You must let them believe your silence is an act of submission. Let them feel victorious. Let them feel comfortable. Comfort makes criminals incredibly lazy." I followed Naomi's instructions flawlessly, while my family assumed I was at home sulking in defeat. I dug deeper into the money trail. The 3 separate wire transfers did not go into a personal checking account under Tessa's name. That would have been too risky, too easily flagged by standard banking algorithms as suspicious income. The bank routing metadata indicated that the funds were deposited directly into a newly formed limited liability company. It was a corporate entity that had been registered with the state a mere 8 weeks prior. The name of the company receiving the stolen funds was Copper Vow Events, LLC. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place late on a Thursday night. I was sitting at my kitchen island, pulling the public formation documents for the LLC directly from the Secretary of State portal. I scrolled past the boilerplate articles of organization and past the listed business address, which perfectly matched the location of the newly acquired wedding venue. I reached the final page, searching for the electronic signature of the registered agent who had paid the standard state filing fee to formally incorporate the business. It was not Tessa. The digital receipt for the state registration fee was linked to a personal credit card and a specific confirmation email address. The email address, printed in crisp, black letters across the bottom of the official state document, belonged to Ron Miller. My breath caught in my throat. My father had not just looked the other way to protect his favorite daughter. He was the one who bought the shovel they used to bury me. Naomi Cade did not operate on assumptions or family mythology, while I was busy tracking the digital footprints of the stolen money. She had formally compelled the release of the foundational document that governed my entire financial existence. It was the original, unredacted trust instrument drafted by my late grandmother, June Miller, growing up. My parents had always summarized my grandmother's estate as a simple, harmonious 50-50 split. They told us she left a pool of money to be divided equally between her two granddaughters when we came of age. It was a narrative designed to foster sibling equality and obscure the actual legal mechanics of the wealth. Sitting in Naomi's pristine office, staring at the thick stack of watermarked, legally bound paper on her desk, I realized my parents had heavily sanitized the truth. "Your grandmother did not trust your father," Naomi stated, her voice devoid of any bedside manner. She tapped a manicured fingernail against a dense paragraph on the third page. "And she certainly did not trust your sister. She knew exactly what kind of dynamic existed in your household." I pulled the heavy document toward me. The legal phrasing was dense, but my background in asset integrity allowed me to translate the archaic terminology into stark reality. My fund was not a simple, passive savings account waiting for me to withdraw from it. It was a heavily fortified, stand-alone subtrust. More importantly, my grandmother had instructed her attorneys to weave a specific, aggressive protective measure into the very fabric of the agreement. It was a penalty clause. "Read Section 4, Paragraph B," Naomi instructed, leaning back in her leather chair. I read the text out loud, my voice steady but my heart hammering against my ribs. The clause stated that if any beneficiary, or any fiduciary, acting as a representative, intentionally misappropriated, diverted, or unlawfully accessed the designated funds of another beneficiary, the offending party would trigger an immediate forfeiture event. They would be legally stripped of their right to receive any future distributions from the remaining general assets of the primary estate. I looked up at Naomi, the sheer magnitude of the clause washing over me. "The remaining general assets," I whispered. Naomi offered a sharp, predatory smile. "Exactly. The Table Rock Lake House." My family owned a sprawling, custom-built cabin on the shores of Table Rock Lake, located a few hundred miles away. For 2 decades, it had been the crown jewel of my parents' real estate portfolio, but the cabin actually belonged to the primary corpus of my grandmother's trust. After years of maintenance costs, my parents had finally put it on the market. It had sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The escrow was currently open, and the final closing date was scheduled to execute in exactly 3 weeks. Tessa was not just relying on the opening night revenue to pay me back. She was holding her breath for the massive lake house disbursement. She planned to use her half of that real estate windfall to silently replenish her severely depleted operating accounts, effectively erasing the evidence of her theft. She thought she could borrow my future to finance her present, and then use the family inheritance to wash the ledger clean. "This changes our entire strategy," Naomi said, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of a flawless legal maneuver. "If we just file a standard civil suit for your stolen $80,000, your family will tie us up in mediation, Tessa will offer a patronizing monthly payment plan, and she will still get her massive payout from the lake house. She wins. But with this penalty clause, we do not just demand restitution. We drop a guillotine on her cash flow. We block the entire lake house disbursement. I felt a dark, satisfying thrill coil in my stomach. It was the perfect counterstrike. But Naomi was not finished. She opened a secondary file folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. When we subpoenaed the historical records from the trust administrators, we found this, Naomi explained quietly. This is the formal acknowledgement document, legally transitioning the management status of your subtrust when you reach the age of majority. I stared at the paper. It was dated from the year I turned 18. At the bottom of the page, beneath a block of dense legal text acknowledging that I was now legally responsible for the account, was a signature. Beneficiary acknowledged Isla Miller. I felt all the blood drain from my face. The signature was a forgery, but it was not the same clumsy, hesitant forgery I had seen on the recent withdrawal forms. The cursive loops were entirely different. The slant of the letters was entirely different. It was a completely separate fake signature, executed over a decade ago. The psychological blow of this second document was infinitely heavier than the missing money. This meant the theft was not a sudden, desperate act born from the pressure of opening a luxury wedding venue. This was a deeply entrenched, systemic pattern of violation. My family had been forging my consent, overriding my legal autonomy, and managing my identity from the shadows since I was a teenager. They had spent years conditioning me to believe I was an independent adult while quietly keeping me locked in a financial playpen they controlled. They viewed my privacy not as a fundamental right, but as community property they could leverage whenever it suited their needs. I left Naomi's office feeling fundamentally unmoored, the reality of my entire adult life fracturing around me. That night, back in the quiet isolation of my apartment, I sat on my sofa in the dark. I did not turn on the television. I did not read. I just stared at the city lights bleeding through the blinds, mapping out the architecture of my family's deception. At 12:14 in the morning, my phone vibrated on the coffee table. The screen illuminated the dark room. Mom. I stared at the name for a long time before picking it up. I pressed the phone to my ear. Hello. Isla. My mother breathed into the receiver. Her voice was a fragile, terrified whisper. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background of her house. She was hiding in the kitchen, terrified of waking my father. I cannot talk long. I just need you to know. Know what? Mom, I asked, my voice flat, refusing to offer her any emotional comfort. Your father, she whispered, her voice trembling. He has a heavy steel lockbox hidden in the back of the garage safe. He keeps files in there, old tax documents, property deeds. But he keeps your files in there, too. I saw him open it the night before Tessa signed the lease for the venue. He had your old banking statements and copies of the trust paperwork spread out on his workbench. She paused, taking a ragged breath. He helped her. Isla. He planned the routing with her. He is protecting her because he is the one who showed her how to unlock the door. Please be careful. You do not know how far he will go to protect his own reputation. Before I could ask a single question, the line clicked and went dead. The dial tone echoed in my ear. My mother's late-night confession did not break my heart. It galvanized it. The final shred of doubt, the lingering hope that my father had simply been an ignorant bystander manipulated by my sister, evaporated completely. He was the architect. Tessa was just the thief who executed the blueprint. I placed my phone back on the coffee table. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical determination. I opened my laptop, drafted an email to Naomi, and hit send. The instructions were simple. File the emergency petition for a formal trust accounting first thing in the morning, and draft the injunction. We were going to drop a legal freeze on the Table Rock Lake escrow accounts before the ink on their closing documents even had a chance to dry. They wanted to play a game with my future. Now, I was going to rewrite the rules. My absolute silence in the face of the theft did not make my sister nervous. It made her bold. While I sat in my quiet apartment compiling forensic timelines, Tessa immediately went to work controlling the public narrative. She knew that in a family war, whoever tells the story first usually wins the loyalty of the audience. The shift started subtly on social media. My phone began buzzing with confused, vaguely sympathetic text messages from extended cousins and aunts. I opened my feed and saw exactly what she was doing. Tessa was posting highly polished, behind-the-scenes videos of the venue renovations. She stood in the middle of a massive, sunlit ballroom holding a clipboard, wearing an immaculate white blazer, and speaking directly to the camera about the sacrifices of being a self-made female entrepreneur. In every single video, she meticulously wove in a specific, toxic undertone. She talked about overcoming negativity from the people closest to her. She casually mentioned how hard it was to build a legacy when your own blood does not understand your vision. She painted a masterpiece of manipulation, positioning herself as the ambitious visionary and silently casting me as the bitter, stagnant younger sister who was simply jealous of her glamorous new life. She made my quiet, minimalist lifestyle seem like a symptom of depression and envy rather than a deliberate choice. My father was the enforcer of her new reality. He called me on a Tuesday evening. He did not ask about my day. He did not ask if I had found another house to buy. He bypassed pleasantries entirely. "You need to drop this ridiculous crusade," he demanded, his voice echoing with that heavy, authoritative timbre he used to end arguments. "If you keep pushing these legal inquiries, you are going to put a freeze on the lake house sale. You are going to ruin a massive real estate transaction for the entire family over a petty misunderstanding." I sat perfectly still, holding the phone to my ear. He had just revealed far more than he intended. I had not told a single person in the family that Naomi and I were looking into the lake house escrow. The fact that he knew about the potential freeze meant he was actively monitoring the legal landscape. He was not a passive observer. He was actively managing the fallout on her behalf. "It is not a misunderstanding, Dad," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "It is a felony." He hung up on me. 48 hours later, a heavy cardboard courier envelope was delivered to my office. Inside was a formal letter from a boutique mediation firm, accompanied by a proposed settlement agreement. It was Tessa's version of an olive branch, dipped in poison. The terms sounded almost reasonable to an untrained eye. She offered to repay the missing funds via a monthly installment of $1,500, commencing 30 days after the grand opening of the venue. In exchange, I only had to sign a single page. It was a waiver acknowledging that the withdrawal of the trust funds had been executed with my prior verbal consent and internal family consensus. I took the document straight to Naomi. She sat behind her mahogany desk, read the single page, and let out a sharp, cynical laugh. "She is incredibly smart. I will give her that," Naomi said, tossing the paper onto her desk. "This is a brilliantly disguised bear trap. If you sign your name on that line, the theft legally transforms into a personal loan. It completely nullifies our claim of intentional misappropriation. You would be validating the forged documents retroactively. And worse, if her business fails in 6 months and she declares bankruptcy, that $1,500 a month disappears forever, and you become just another unsecured creditor at the bottom of the pile." Naomi opened a secondary file folder. "But she is also getting sloppy. During our preliminary discovery, we forced her to provide the receipts she submitted to the trust administrators to justify the initial withdrawal. Look at these." She slid 3 printed invoices across the desk. They were for custom electrical rewiring, imported floral installations, and antique furniture restoration. "Look at the service dates," Naomi instructed. I leaned in. The dates printed on the invoices were heavily staggered, but the actual payment receipt dates at the bottom were completely wrong. They had been manually backdated, Tessa was frantically doctoring financial records to make it look like she had paid for these massive venue expenses out of her own pocket months ago, and was simply using the trust money to reimburse herself. It was a clumsy, desperate attempt to legitimize the cash flow after the crime had already been committed. But the final, fatal mistake did not come from a forged legal document. It came from a completely random phone call. I was driving home from Naomi's office when my phone rang through my car's audio system. The caller identification showed a local commercial number. I answered it, expecting a spam call. "Hi, is this the emergency contact for Copper Vow events?" a young woman asked over a noisy background. "I am calling from the Premium Audiovisual Rental Company. We are trying to finalize the loading dock schedule for the grand opening next month, but the primary corporate email is bouncing back." I gripped the steering wheel. Tessa had obviously filled out a massive stack of vendor intake forms in a frantic rush, in her haste. Her browser's autofill feature must have populated an old emergency contact field with my obsolete family email address, the same one she had used to reroute my bank statements. "I can take the message," I said smoothly, keeping my voice light and professional. "What date are you scheduling the final equipment drop?" "We need to drop the stage lighting and the soundboards on the morning of the opening," the woman replied. "That is Thursday the 12th. And we just need to confirm that the final balloon payment for the equipment rental will be wired by noon that same day. Otherwise, we cannot authorize our crew to unload the trucks." "Thursday the 12th, I repeated softly. "Thank you. I will make sure the payment is prioritized." I ended the call and pulled my car over to the side of the road. I opened my digital calendar on my phone and looked at the month ahead. I scrolled down to Thursday the 12th. It was the exact same day the title company was scheduled to close the escrow on the Table Rock Lake House. I called Naomi immediately. I explained the vendor call, the date, and the final balloon payment demand. I could practically hear Naomi smiling through the receiver. "She is completely leveraged," Naomi said, her voice dropping into a low, predatory register. "Tessa does not have a single dime of operating capital left. She burned through your money to secure the property and pay the initial deposits. Now, she has hundreds of thousands of dollars in final vendor payments due on the exact day of her grand opening. She scheduled the party on the same day as the real estate closing because she is planning to take her half of the lake house money, immediately transfer it into her corporate account, and wire it to the vendors just hours before the guests arrive." It was a high-wire act of financial desperation. She was floating an entire luxury enterprise on the assumption that a massive real estate wire transfer would clear on time. "If the lake house money gets delayed," I whispered into the phone, "she cannot pay the vendors. They will not unload the trucks. And she will have 200 elite guests arriving to an empty, silent room." Naomi finished. I sat in my parked car, watching the evening traffic pass by. The family group chat was currently buzzing with photos of floral arrangements and excited messages from my mother about what designer dress she was going to wear. I could have taken a screenshot of the doctored invoices and posted them online. I could have driven to my parents' house and screamed until my throat bled. Instead, I put my car in drive and merged back onto the street. I decided I would not fight her in the mud. I would not engage in a public war of words to defend my character. I would let my sister build her beautiful, fragile glass house. I would let her step up onto the stage she stole from me. And then, at the exact moment she needed the spotlight the most, I would use the law to reach into the walls and sever the power cord entirely. The rain was falling in thin, gray sheets against the window of the diner on the edge of the city. My mother had chosen this specific location because it was 20 miles away from the suburb where my parents lived. She sat in a vinyl booth, nursing a cup of black coffee she had not touched in 45 minutes. When I slid into the seat across from her, she looked exhausted. The manicured, composed suburban matriarch was completely gone. In her place was a terrified woman clutching a faded manila envelope. "He went out to the hardware store," my mother whispered, her eyes darting toward the diner entrance. "I went into the garage right after he left. I took the box before he could move it to the storage unit." She pushed the envelope across the laminate table. Her hands were shaking violently. I did not offer her a comforting smile. Comfort was a currency this family had bankrupted long ago. I pulled the flap open and slid the contents out onto the table. It was a collection of documents dating back nearly a decade. At the very top was a stack of unopened, professionally sealed letters from Prairie Gate Trust Administration. The postage dates indicated they were mailed the year I turned 25. I opened the first envelope. It was a mandatory compliance letter, a formal request for me to update my direct contact information, acknowledge my sole beneficiary status, and take full, independent administrative control of the account. The letters had never reached my mailbox. They had been intercepted, sorted, and buried in a steel lockbox next to my father's power tools. But the most devastating piece of evidence was not the official stationery. It was a small, neon yellow sticky note attached to a bank statement from 6 years ago. The handwriting on the note was sharp, angular, and unmistakably belonged to my father. I read the words written in black ink. Leave for later. Tessa needs school money for the kid. My chest tightened so painfully I had to remind myself to breathe. My sister had a child, a daughter who was now 7 years old. The timeline aligned perfectly with her private school admissions. This meant the missing $80,000 was not just a sudden, opportunistic target for a wedding venue. My trust fund had been viewed as a revolving family credit line for years. Whenever Tessa faced a financial shortfall, my father simply looked at my locked account and decided my future was less important than her present. 2 days later, Naomi Cade and I sat in her conference room reviewing a highly confidential, 30-page forensic analysis report. Naomi had hired an independent handwriting expert to examine the entire chain of custody regarding the signatures on my trust documents. Naomi laid 2 magnified transparent slides side by side on the glass table. The forensic examiner found a definitive fracture in the timeline, Naomi explained, her tone purely analytical. The fake signatures on the documents from the past 3 months, the ones authorizing the massive withdrawals for the wedding venue, show distinct signs of slow tracing. The pen pressure is uneven. There are micro-hesitations. It is the work of someone trying very hard to mimic your handwriting. That is your sister. Naomi tapped the second slide. It was the signature from the document I had seen days earlier, the one falsely acknowledging my transition of management when I came of age. But this older signature is completely different, Naomi continued. There is no hesitation. The baseline slant, the aggressive loop of the letters, the heavy pressure applied at the end of the stroke. The examiner compared it against the endorsed checks and tax returns we pulled from your father's public business filings. It is a 99% biometric match. My father forged my name. He was not just turning a blind eye while his favorite daughter stole from me. He was the original architect of the fraud. He had forged the foundational documents years ago to keep the administrative gate open, ensuring he retained silent control over the money. He had built the back door. Tessa merely walked through it. This was the profound, suffocating reality that finally broke my heart. It was never truly about the $80,000. It was about the insidious, quiet betrayal that had defined my entire adulthood. I thought back to every single time I had tried to untangle my financial independence in my early 20s. Every time I asked about the trust, my father would place a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder and use his deep, authoritative voice. "Do not worry about it, Isla," he would say. "I am handling the paperwork for you. Focus on your career." I had interpreted those words as paternal care. I thought he was protecting me from bureaucratic stress. In reality, every time he said he was handling the paperwork, he was actively cementing his control. He was keeping the keys to my autonomy hidden in his pocket, deciding behind closed doors when and how my property would be sacrificed to subsidize my sister's life. Naomi leaned forward, breaking my train of thought. This fundamentally shifts our legal standing. We are no longer just looking at civil theft by a sibling. Your father acted as a de facto fiduciary, and he grossly violated that duty. I am amending our emergency filings. We are adding a formal request for a surcharge against trustee conduct. We are going to ask the probate judge to hold Ron Miller personally and financially liable for facilitating the misappropriation of your assets. Naomi paused, her eyes narrowing strategically. However, when we file the public injunction against the lake house, we keep the narrative strictly focused on Tessa and her limited liability company. If we throw your father's decade-long forgery scheme into the initial public filing, the judge might view it as a messy, convoluted family feud and delay the asset freeze to untangle it. We need the freeze right now to stop the venue opening. We hit Tessa with the theft to stop the money, and we quietly strangle your father in probate court with the surcharge. It was a brilliant, vicious strategy. It separated the emotional betrayal from the tactical execution. Before I left the diner that afternoon, my mother had reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Isla, please," she had begged, tears welling in her eyes. "If your father finds out I gave you this, he will never forgive me. I cannot survive a war in that house. Please do not make me choose between you two." I had looked at the woman who had spent 34 years watching her youngest daughter be quietly diminished, always choosing the path of least resistance. I gently pulled my hand out of her grasp. "I am not asking you to choose a side, Mom." I had told her, my voice eerily calm and devoid of the anger I used to feel. "You can go home. You can sit next to him on the sofa. You can go to Tessa's grand opening and drink champagne and pretend we are a perfect family. But I need you to understand a new boundary." I picked up the manila envelope, feeling the weight of the forged history inside it. "I will never ask you to stand up for me," I said softly. "But from this second forward, I will no longer stay silent and play the victim just to maintain a comfortable illusion for the rest of you. I am going to burn this lie to the ground, and I do not care who is standing too close to the fire when it happens." The art of legal warfare does not lie solely in the staggering weight of your collected evidence. It lies in the exact, unforgiving precision of your timing. If you strike your opponent too early, you give them the critical space they need to maneuver, to secure emergency credit lines, or to liquidate alternate assets to cover their tracks. If you strike too late, the money is already permanently absorbed into the ether, and you are left fighting a bitter war over a completely empty vault. It was late Wednesday afternoon, exactly 24 hours before the highly publicized grand opening of her luxury wedding venue and the simultaneous execution of the family lake house real estate closing. Naomi and I sat in her downtown conference room, surrounded by the sharp scent of fresh printer toner and hot coffee, assembling a lethal, watertight judicial packet. We were not merely filing a standard civil complaint for stolen property. We were formally requesting an ex parte emergency injunction, a devastating legal maneuver designed to freeze a target's entire financial world in place before they even realized they were under attack. We stacked the legal exhibits with slow, surgical care. First went the chronological withdrawal timeline, proving the exact days the capital vanished from my grandmother's designated fund. Second went the technical network routing logs, demonstrating the unauthorized contact data modifications executed from my parents' suburban home. Third was the preliminary forensic handwriting analysis report, confirming the dual layers of forgery spanning across a decade. Fourth was the banking trace, undeniably linking the stolen trust distributions directly into the newly formed corporate operating accounts of her event business. Finally, Naomi placed a highlighted copy of the original trust instrument right on top, specifically illuminating the aggressive penalty clause that demanded total forfeiture of future assets in the event of intentional beneficiary theft. While Naomi finalized the heavy courthouse filings, I drafted a formal, chillingly polite notice of dispute. I sent it via certified digital courier directly to the senior compliance officer at Riverbend Title and Escrow, the neutral institution handling the pending sale of the family lake house. The language I used was cold and unambiguous. I formally notified their legal department of an active, heavily litigated beneficiary dispute regarding the underlying assets of the estate. I demanded they completely halt any scheduled capital disbursements from the pending property sale until a probate judge could officially verify the lawful recipients. Escrow companies are notoriously risk-averse. The moment that email landed in their system, my sister's anticipated financial parachute was legally paralyzed. They would not move a single dime if it meant exposing their own firm to liability. Naomi, however, was a predator who understood that you must sever every possible lifeline. She drafted a single, beautifully sterile letter to Crescent Ridge Capital, the private equity firm that had provided the initial seed funding for the venue. She did not outright accuse my sister of felony theft in the letter, as that would open us up to messy defamation claims if the judge hesitated for even a day. Instead, she used a single, devastating corporate phrase. She informed the senior financiers that there was a potential misrepresentation of the primary source of funds regarding their clients' required capital contributions. It was just enough manufactured smoke to trigger the equity firm's internal risk management alarms. Across the city, completely oblivious to the legal avalanche hanging directly over her head, Tessa was rapidly accelerating her spending, because I had maintained absolute, suffocating silence since the terrible family dinner. She assumed she had successfully bullied me into submission. Her social media updates became increasingly manic and extravagant. She posted videos of herself directing crews of men installing cascading floral chandeliers. She showcased the premium open bar packages she had upgraded at the very last minute. She tagged an expensive drone videographer and a high-profile local master of ceremonies. She was eagerly burning through cash she did not actually possess, utterly confident that the massive Lake House wire transfer would hit her accounts by Thursday afternoon to seamlessly cover the massive deficit. My father, however, sensed the unnatural, heavy quiet. He knew my total withdrawal was completely out of character, over the span of 3 days. Ron called my phone 19 times. I let every single call drop silently to voicemail. His messages started as stern directives and rapidly devolved into desperate, vicious emotional threats. He threatened to completely sever my relationship with the family. He told me I was dead to him. In his final, most manipulative voicemail, his voice shook with manufactured rage as he accused me of actively destroying the financial future of my young nieces. He told me I was punishing innocent children for my own selfish pride. Hearing him weaponize my sister's children made my blood run absolutely cold. It also reminded me of the severe collateral damage that was about to occur. I picked up my phone, bypassed my father and my sister entirely, and opened a direct text message thread with my brother-in-law, Caleb Mercer. Caleb was a quiet, passive man who mostly stayed out of the toxic family crossfire. I typed a very brief, completely unadorned message. Caleb, if the grand opening tomorrow night experiences any sudden administrative or legal complications, please take the girls to your mother's house immediately. Do not let the children stay at the venue and witness a panic. I hit send. I did not offer any further explanation. It was the only humane concession I was willing to make in this entire war. On Thursday morning, the exact day the world was supposed to celebrate her triumph, the courthouse granted our request for an immediate, closed-door emergency hearing based on the overwhelming physical evidence of fraud. I stood in the cold marble hallway outside the probate chamber, wearing a dark, tailored suit, watching the analog clock on the wall tick forward. Naomi stepped out of the heavy wooden doors, adjusting the collar of her jacket. She walked over to me, her face a mask of absolute professional focus. She looked down at her wristwatch, then looked me directly in the eyes. "The judge is reviewing the penalty clause and the wire traces right now," Naomi said, her voice dropping to a low, intense register. "If the judge signs that order before 4 in the afternoon, the escrow halts, the business accounts freeze, and tonight, you will receive a phone call you will remember for the rest of your life." By 2 in the afternoon, I was sitting alone in the driver's seat of my parked car in the courthouse parking garage. The engine was off. The concrete structure was dim and silent, echoing only with the distant rumble of city traffic outside. I did not feel the sudden, euphoric rush of victory I had always seen portrayed in movies. There was no internal celebration or cheering. There was only a heavy, profound sense of finality settling deep into my bones. I unlocked my phone, opened a blank digital notepad file, and slowly typed 2 sentences onto the glowing screen. This is not revenge for $80,000. This is me reclaiming my right to exist. The emergency ex parte hearing did not take place in a grand, sweeping courtroom with vaulted ceilings and an audience. It occurred in a small, intensely claustrophobic judge's chamber with cheap wood paneling and a drop ceiling that hummed loudly with the sound of struggling air conditioning. Sitting across the heavy oak table was my father, wearing his best Sunday suit, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles fluttered. Next to him sat Tessa, dressed in a sharp conservative navy blazer, attempting to project the aura of a mildly inconvenienced executive. Their hired defense attorney, an older man with a silver watch and a deeply patronizing smile, stood at the edge of the table. He was desperately attempting to paint a picture of a tight-knit family experiencing a minor, unfortunate communication breakdown. "Your Honor," the opposing counsel said, his voice dripping with forced, neighborly warmth. "What we have here today is not a malicious misappropriation of assets. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of an unspoken family arrangement. The funds in question were utilized as a temporary bridge loan to secure a commercial lease. The defendant fully intends to reimburse the account in its entirety within 30 days following her business launch. This is simply a private family matter that has unnecessarily spilled over into the legal system." Naomi Cade did not roll her eyes. She did not object or interrupt his speech. She let him finish his carefully constructed fairy tale. Then, she stood up, unbuttoned her tailored jacket, and walked to the center of the small room. She did not appeal to the judge's emotions. She brought out a large, starkly printed board and placed it on a wooden easel. It was a simple, brutal cash flow diagram. "Your Honor," Naomi stated, pointing a silver pen at the top box on the board. "This is my client's protected trust fund. The money flowed from here, was transferred into a hidden intermediary holding account, then wired directly into the newly incorporated Copper Vow Events corporate ledger, and finally transferred out as a non-refundable commercial venue deposit. This is not an internal family loan. This is a highly calculated, multi-tiered asset diversion." The opposing attorney bristled, his patronizing smile slipping. He reached into his leather briefcase and produced a single sheet of printed paper, sliding it across the polished table toward the judge. "We have a printed electronic mail correspondence," the defense attorney countered, tapping the paper. "It is dated exactly 2 months ago. In this document, the plaintiff explicitly agreed to support her sister's venture using these exact trust funds. She gave her written blessing." The judge glanced at the paper, then handed it to Naomi. Naomi did not even look at it. She slid it directly to me. I looked down at the printed text. A cold, genuine smile spread across my face. It was the first time I had smiled in weeks. I looked up and met the judge's eyes. "Your Honor," I said, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of anger, "the text of this email is completely fabricated, but more importantly, the signature block automatically generated at the bottom of this message includes a corporate job title and a direct extension line for an employer. I resigned from exactly 4 years ago. I have not utilized that specific signature block since I was 30 years old." The judge's eyebrows raised sharply. He looked over the rim of his reading glasses at Tessa, whose face suddenly drained of color. She had dug up an ancient email template from my old job to forge a recent conversation. A catastrophic oversight born of arrogance. Naomi did not give them a single second to recover. She stepped forward, handing a bound, sworn affidavit to the bench. "Furthermore," Naomi continued, her voice slicing through the tense air, "the defense claims an unspoken agreement existed, yet the technical data logs subpoenaed directly from Prairie Gate Trust Administration confirmed that the Internet protocol address used to secretly change my client's secure contact information traces directly to the primary residence of Ronald Miller. the plaintiff's father. It did not originate from her own apartment. They had to digitally isolate my client from her own bank to execute the withdrawal in the dark. Then, Naomi pulled out the absolute masterstroke. She placed the magnified, high-resolution image of the notary seal directly in front of the judge. If the court requires absolute, undeniable proof of fraudulent intent, I direct your attention to the withdrawal authorization forms, Naomi said, her tone absolute. The defense relies heavily on this supposedly notarized signature. However, a simple cross-reference with the state public database reveals that this notary public's commission had officially expired 28 days prior to the date written on this document. The document is not just forged, the notarization is legally void. The judge leaned back in his heavy leather chair. The demeanor of a bored referee vanished entirely, replaced by the sharp, unforgiving gaze of a magistrate staring at a documented felony. He turned his attention directly to my father. "Mr. Miller," the judge said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, commanding register. "You are listed on the institutional logs as the verbal guarantor for this transaction. Did you, or did you not, have your daughter present in the room when you authorized the release of her private financial assets?" My father shifted uncomfortably in his wooden chair. His heavy patriarchal armor was completely useless in a room governed by perjury laws and hard evidence. He cleared his throat, trying to summon his booming, authoritative voice, but it came out thin and desperate. "I was managing it internally, Your Honor," my father stammered, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "I confirmed her identity over the phone because I knew she would ultimately agree to help her sister. I was acting in the best interest of the family." He had just confessed on the official court record. Under direct questioning, he admitted he verified a massive financial transaction without my physical presence or actual consent. Tessa, realizing the entire legal defense was collapsing around her, completely lost her composure. She slammed her palm flat against the table. "This is ridiculous!" Tessa shouted, glaring at me with pure venom. "This is exactly how our family manages things. We pool our resources when someone needs it. It is family money, and I needed it to secure the business." The room went dead silent. Naomi looked at the judge and raised a single, victorious eyebrow. Tessa had just dug her own grave. By angrily claiming they pool their resources, while simultaneously acknowledging she knew the funds were explicitly sourced from my designated trust to fund her venue. She inadvertently admitted to knowing the money was not a joint asset. She confessed to treating my personal property as a community slush fund. The judge let out a heavy sigh, the distinct sound of deep judicial fatigue. He picked up his heavy black fountain pen. "I am not issuing a final ruling on the permanent damages, nor am I ruling on the trustee's surcharge today," the judge announced, his pen hovering over the stack of emergency injunction orders Naomi had prepared. "However, the evidence of unauthorized conversion and documentary fraud is overwhelming. I am signing the temporary restraining order." He pressed the pen to the paper. "I am authorizing an immediate freeze on all corporate accounts tied to Copper Vow events," the judge continued, his voice echoing in the small chamber. "Furthermore, I am granting the motion to paralyze the pending escrow distribution from the Table Rock Lake property sale. Those funds will be held in a neutral trust to preserve the disputed assets until a full forensic accounting is completed." The sharp scratch of his signature on the heavy paper sounded like a guillotine dropping. The hearing was adjourned. We walked out of the chambers and into the brightly lit marble hallway of the courthouse. I stood near the elevators with Naomi. The heavy wooden doors opened, and Tessa strutted out. She was aggressively adjusting her blazer, her chin held high, wearing a pathetic, fragile mask of arrogant defiance. She walked right up to me, her eyes burning with misplaced confidence. "It is just a temporary hold. Isla," Tessa hissed, her voice dripping with condescension. "It is just a piece of paper. You delayed me, but you did not stop me. I am going to call the bank and deal with this tomorrow morning. Tonight, I have a massive party to host, and you are not going to ruin it." She turned on her heel and marched down the hallway, her high heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I stood perfectly still, watching her walk away. She honestly believed she had survived the ambush. She thought the legal system moved at the sluggish speed of the postal service. She had absolutely no idea that the digital notifications of those court orders were already racing through fiber optic cables across the city, moving infinitely faster than she could ever drive. The injunctions were hitting the escrow company servers, locking the bank ledgers, and shutting down the vendor payment gateways at that exact second. Tessa was walking out of this courthouse, completely oblivious to the fact that she was about to step onto a stage that had already been entirely dismantled. The evening began with a blinding, manufactured brilliance. The Copper Vine house was bathed in warm amber uplighting, casting a golden glow over the imported floral backdrops and the polished concrete floors. 200 high-net-worth guests drifted through the vaulted main hall, holding crystal champagne flutes and wearing designer evening wear. In the center of it all stood Tessa. She was wearing an immaculate white tailored suit, laughing brightly for the roaming event photographers, radiating the absolute confidence of a woman who believed she had outsmarted everyone. She genuinely thought the morning's legal ambush was nothing more than a temporary clerical hurdle that she could simply ignore until the weekend was over. At 6:40 in the evening, exactly 20 minutes before the scheduled ribbon-cutting ceremony, the invisible tripwires Naomi and I had meticulously laid finally snapped. It started quietly at the perimeter of the room. The lead production manager for the audio-visual company checked his tablet, frowned, and tapped the shoulder of the head sound engineer. The final balloon payment wire transfer, which Tessa had promised would clear by 5 o'clock, was officially flagged as suspended by their banking portal, following strict company policy for delinquent corporate accounts. The engineer immediately reached over and killed the power to the main stage amplifiers. The deep, ambient lounge music cut out instantly, leaving a jarring, echoing silence in the massive room. Simultaneously, the lead coordinator for the luxury catering company received an automated text message from her payroll department. The enormous deposit required to release the evening's food service had bounced. Within 3 minutes, the premium florist and the elite bar staffing agency received identical catastrophic banking alerts on their devices. Behind the scenes, the digital guillotine had dropped. The formal notice from Riverbend Title and Escrow had officially hit Tessa's inbox. The document coldly stated that the massive capital disbursement from the Table Rock Lake property closing had been indefinitely frozen under a strict judicial mandate. Not a single cent of that real estate money was going to cross over into her possession tonight, or anytime soon. And because the escrow was paralyzed. Crescent Ridge Capital, the private equity firm backing her venture, executed their own rapid risk management protocol, triggered by Naomi's precise warning about misrepresented financial sources. The firm's legal department enacted an immediate, total freeze on the operating credit line of Copper Vow Events. The financial oxygen was completely sucked out of the building. The dominoes did not just fall, they shattered the entire facade in a matter of minutes. The synchronized chaos was immediate. The hired waitstaff, realizing they were not legally guaranteed their hourly wages for the night, began untying their black aprons and walking out through the loading dock doors. The bartender stopped pouring drinks, stepping away from the custom marble bars and packing up their specialized equipment. The guests, initially confused by the sudden silence and the retreating staff, began to murmur. The whispers spread through the glittering crowd like a localized earthquake. Tessa's polished smile vanished. The color completely drained from her face as her event coordinator shoved a vibrating tablet into her hands, showing her the cascade of red banking alerts and critical legal notices. The illusion of the self-made entrepreneur disintegrated in front of 200 of the city's elite. Panic, raw and unadulterated, took over. She shoved her way through the confused crowd of investors and family members, abandoning the photographers, and sprinted down the hallway toward the back office. She slammed the heavy wooden door shut, and that was exactly when my phone rang in my dark, quiet apartment. "Isla!" Tessa shrieked over the speakerphone, her voice tearing at the seams. Isla, you need to call them right now. You need to call your lawyer and stop this. I stood in my kitchen, listening to her hyperventilate. The sheer terror in her voice was the culmination of weeks of calculated, silent work. She screamed that I had destroyed her life, that I was humiliating her in front of the mayor, that I was tearing the family legacy to shreds. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue about the forged signatures, the stolen inheritance, or the lies she told our relatives to make me look like the villain. I simply leaned closer to the phone. I did not take anything from you, Tessa, I said, my voice as cold and hard as polished steel. I just stopped you from taking any more from me. Before she could scream another word, a second call beeped through on my call waiting. It was my father. I merged the lines. Isla, what the hell did you do? My father roared, though the underlying tremble of absolute panic betrayed his manufactured anger. The title company just called me. My half of the lake house escrow is locked. They are telling me the entire estate distribution is frozen pending a fiduciary review. You froze my money too. He was no longer the untouchable patriarch dictating terms from the head of the dining table. He was a man who had just realized his complicity carried a massive, inescapable financial penalty. The court was not just looking at Tessa. They were coming for the architect of the forgery. The probate judge wants to know why you forged an 18-year-old's signature a decade ago. Dad, I replied smoothly, you should probably hire your own defense attorney. Good luck with the party. I disconnected the call, walked over to my kitchen island, and finally poured myself a glass of water. The war was over. The ultimate resolution arrived in a brightly lit courtroom 4 weeks later. The probate judge did not offer any leniency to a family that treated fraud as a casual domestic convenience. The ruling was absolute. The court ordered the immediate restitution of my stolen $80,000, plus compounded interest and full coverage of all my legal fees, pulled directly from Tessa's frozen assets. But the judge did not stop there. A severe financial surcharge was officially applied against my father for gross negligence and breach of his fiduciary duty, permanently damaging his pristine financial record, and the most devastating blow fell on my sister. The judge fully enacted my grandmother's penalty clause. Tessa was legally stripped of her right to receive any future distributions from the general family trust until every single stolen cent was verified as returned. She lost the massive lake house payout entirely. 3 days after the final ruling cleared, I sat in the sunlit office of my real estate agent. I held a sleek black pen in my hand. The restored funds were sitting safely in a secure, newly minted account that only I controlled. I leaned forward and signed the final closing contract for the historic brick townhouse in Maplewood. I did not win this war by screaming at a dinner table. I did not win by posting passive-aggressive statements on the internet or begging my parents to finally love me equally. I won by utilizing cold, irrefutable evidence. I won by mastering the devastating power of perfect timing. And most importantly, I won by entirely refusing to continue living as the quiet, obedient daughter who had to silently absorb a knife to the back just so everyone else could enjoy a peaceful family dinner. The cycle of theft was broken, and for the very first time in my life, the house I was standing in was entirely my own. Thank you so much for listening to this story today. Please drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together. Do not forget to subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.